You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas.
Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
That makes me Bill Thomas.
And it's been a crazy 24 hours, hasn't it, Bill Thomas?
Yeah, I'm exhausted. Yesterday was an adrenaline high. Today, the reality of the developments in the Colonial Parkway murders are beginning to settle in, and we are getting deluged with information which we will be trying to sort out and pass along to law enforcement to help keep the forward momentum of the Colonial Parkway murders happening.
For everybody who immediately asked, when are you guys going to put an episode out? We hope this is what you had in mind. We're doing our best, but as Bill said, it's been an adrenaline-packed 24 hours, and I was so amped when I got home yesterday, and I couldn't settle that I had to go for a run around the neighborhood at like top speed, and I still wasn't able to bleed off all of it.
Yeah, I will admit, quite exhausted on Monday because I actually knew this was coming.
Yeah.
And Sunday night, I usually sleep really well. I'm one of those frustrating people that just lie down, go to sleep through the night, the whole thing. I figure if you're going to spend a third of your life doing something, why not try to get good at it? So,
exactly.
Pamela, my partner, teases me about being an incredibly good sleeper, and she wishes she could follow suit. However, Sunday night was not one of those nights. First of all, Sunday evening, my phone started blowing up with people reaching out to me to let me know that people that lived in Lancaster, Virginia, were aware of the fact that the FBI had conducted a raid up in that part of Virginia, which is about an hour and 15 minutes or so north of Williamsburg.
Yep.
This beautiful area that I've never been to, but I've looked at online, up near the Rappahannock River.
It's called the Northern Neck.
And I had to look all this stuff up. Somebody asked me today, we've been hearing from a ton of people with information which the FBI is seeking. We're doing our best to help the FBI and the Virginia State Police move these cases forward. People have been reaching out to me, and one of the questions that someone asked me today was, have you ever been to the Northern Neck? And I said, nope. Have you ever been up there?
I have, not often, but I think Mark and I decided to take a very random road trip there a couple of months back. I don't remember for why. I think we were just looking for a really good burger of all things. And we were in a rut and decided, you know what, let's just go someplace else, any place else. And let's go see if we can find a good, interesting restaurant to eat at. Sometimes we'll just go places looking for good restaurants.
Got it.
It is very pretty up there, yeah.
So let's get into why we might be talking about the Northern Neck with a little bit of a conversation about January 8th, 2024's press conference with developments in the Colonial Parkway murders.
So you knew this was coming. I had an inkling, and I remember calling you the night before and saying, I don't want to get your hopes up, and you were like, no, go ahead. And I said, I just heard there's going to be a press conference tomorrow. And the two of us figured out, okay, it's probably about these cases in the Colonial Parkway, or at least some of the Colonial Parkway cases. I remember waiting on pins and needles all morning for you to text me and say, hey, there's going to be a press conference at 1:30. And then it was wait till pins and needles until 1:30. But when we finally got to 1:30 yesterday, the Virginia State Police, the FBI, and several other law enforcement agencies held this press conference to announce that they classified it as major updates in cold case homicides. And at that point, they announced that Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. of Kilmarnock, Virginia, who is now deceased, was responsible for the deaths of Robin Edwards and David Knobling on Ragged Island in 1987 and Teresa Howell in Hampton in 1989. And that was a bombshell.
It sure was. Off the bat, something struck me as odd and still does, which is the announcement regarding the press conference did not highlight the Colonial Parkway murders. In speaking to reporters, I did some interviews yesterday and today. We want to keep the focus primarily on the three families, of course, the families of Robin Edwards, David Knobling, and Teresa Howell. I was also asked to do some interviews. Some of the reporters were looking for kind of a general reaction to the news and how the other families felt about how this might help move the rest of the Colonial Parkway murders forward. But one of the things that the reporters told me wasn't very clear that they were going to be discussing the Colonial Parkway murders. And there was even an odd reference to Isle of Wight, which is Isle of Wight County, again, without really highlighting the fact that we're going to be talking about Robin Edwards and David Knobling, one of the 4 double homicides in the Colonial Parkway murders.
We had talked about that when I was leaving school to come back home to watch the press conference. And I was wondering, because they hadn't said anything in the press release about Colonial Parkway murders, we'd speculated, you and I, that maybe they were burying the lead on this and that they wanted to maybe make the announcement and then say, oh, and we have tied him to X number of other cases in the Colonial Parkway murders. Obviously, they didn't do that. But I also was curious, like, why did they not immediately say 2 of the Colonial Parkway murders cases have been linked to this guy?
It's quite curious. So what did we learn about Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., who is the suspect in question? We learned that this guy is a waterman from the Northern Neck, which is why we were discussing the Northern Neck. He's described as transient, often living on his wooden boat, the Denny Wade, and that's named for 2 of his kids who'd be grown-ups by this point, Denny and Wade. He spent time on the York River, and this I think is very important, and often docked in Gloucester and Hampton. This is really important. He drove a blue 1966 Dodge Fargo truck with a custom license plate that said EMRAW, as in Edam Raw. Keeping in mind, this guy is a crabber, fisherman, and most importantly, an oysterman. So the EMRAW, in addition to being a sexually explicit, suggestive license plate, also refers to oysters, one would assume.
I took it to a much different, darker place, which probably says a lot about me.
Perhaps. Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., it's very important to make that senior distinction because he has a son who has the exact same name, who's Alan Wade Wilmer Jr., who would have been, by the way, about 8 years old at the time of the Colonial Parkway murders. So he's a grown man now, but he was a little kid back then.
And he was absolutely horrified to learn this about his father. I feel really terrible for his family, having to learn that your father is a monster, essentially.
Yeah.
I feel really terrible for them.
This vehicle, this 66 Dodge Fargo truck, was very distinctive because, remember, he is driving this truck as recently as the 1980s, and the truck has equipment that's attached to it, which is designed for hauling equipment used in fishing, crabbing, and oyster pulling. You can tell I don't know a lot about how oysters are harvested.
Oystering is just how you say it.
But this truck is incredibly important. And one of the things we're going to be emphasizing here on Mind Over Murder is the FBI and the Virginia State Police and the Hampton Police Department and local law enforcement have asked for your help. They want to hear from people who recognize this very distinctive truck. It's old and faded. I would describe the color as blue-green. Yes. It had writing on the doors of the truck and, of course, the Edam Raw license plate. And then all of the equipment, they almost look like a tow truck would look like, with these big tongs, I'm told they're called, that extend out and are used for oystering. This truck is really important. Further, Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. and his appearance are very distinctive. He's 5'5" tall, so he is, I think the average American male is about 5'10". I happen to be 6 feet tall. So he is 7 inches shorter than I am, and I don't think I don't look like an extraordinarily tall guy. I think I look fairly average in height. He's 5'5". He's very muscular. He weighs 165 pounds. So if you saw this man in this very distinctive truck, that's pretty memorable. And then if you saw him outside his vehicle, walking around or working or whatever, he's very short, really out of the ordinary, and he's very stocky. His nickname was Pokey. And he almost sounds like a cartoon character. When I heard him described, I thought, this guy almost sounds like Popeye, this little guy with these big arms. He's got to be a very striking figure. We've got pictures in our show notes of Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. The folks from law enforcement did a fantastic job. They had a whole photo array of what he looked like at various times over the years.
Yes.
Which is incredibly helpful as a younger man, all the way up to when he was somewhat older and he died at age 63, which we'll get into in a minute. And then they've got great pictures of the truck, the license plate. This should help people. He was a very avid outdoorsman. He was a hunter, a fisherman. What they're looking for are people that may have hunted and fished with him, keeping in mind one of the 4 Colonial Parkway murders, that of Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer, took place at a hunt club. I know that law enforcement is looking into, could he have been a guest at that hunt club? That's the one off Interstate 64. If he was coming down to the Gloucester, Hampton area, he might have come down 64 from the Northern Neck. That hunt club where Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer's bodies were found in 1989 would have been a place that he might have passed. And we're wondering if he might have ever hunted or socialized with the members of that hunt club. So the background needed for the life, if you will, of Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. is very much needed right now. People are really coming forward and contacting us, and I've been talking to a number of people online, trying to catch up on the calls and texts. I know the same thing is happening with Joyce Call Canada and other family members. We really want to try to push these folks to talk to the FBI and the Virginia State Police because they need more information about this guy.
Yes, absolutely. And they are better equipped with the tip lines and everything to handle the kind of volume that we're getting. I know that you're rather overwhelmed with it right at the moment. So we do want to stress to folks, thank you very much for reaching out. We really do appreciate that. As the FBI, I'm sure, would like us to stress, we are not investigators. We are not equipped to handle the volume of tips that are coming in. Please, by all means, make sure that you send that information to the FBI, the Virginia State Police. We will put links to everything on our show notes. And you're welcome to give the information to us as well, but please do send it to the FBI or the VSP first. They really need that information, and they can do a whole lot more with it than 2 humble podcasters, both of whom have day jobs and can't unfortunately go out and do the amount of sleuthing that we would like to do.
The investigators know what they're looking for. They are definitely looking to fill in some blanks on this man's life. He died of natural causes at home in December 2017. As a result of his death, his body was not discovered for quite some time, and he'd gone into an advanced state of decomposition, which is, again, a very sad way to die. When somebody dies in a situation like that, and they're in an advanced state of decomposition, as he was, they take a DNA sample to confirm, is this actually the person we think it should be? And they were able to confirm his identity. later on, when law enforcement was looking for more information about this potential suspect in the Colonial Parkway murders, they were able to request and receive a copy of his DNA report. That led to the discoveries that were announced at the press conference yesterday.
I know that I, like everyone else who was watching, was holding my breath to see what they were going to say with regard to connections to the other Colonial Parkway murders cases. I want to quote directly from my transcript of the press conference here, because I think it's very important that everybody hears the wording used. And I know not everybody was able to stream that live on their computer or their phone. And this is from the joint press conference on January 8th. And the person speaking was Corinne Geller, who is the PR person for Virginia State Police. Many in the region will recognize that the Isle of Wight double homicide as one that occurred during a series of double homicides collectively known as the Colonial Parkway Murders. Although the similarities in these double homicides, which spanned a 3-year period, cannot be ignored, at this time, there is no forensic or physical evidence to link the Isle of Wight County homicides to those other double murders. The remaining double homicides, the 2 in York County that occurred on the Colonial Parkway and the one that occurred in New Kent County, are still active investigations and our combined investigative efforts continue. End quote.
Let me push back a little bit here.
Go ahead.
First of all, I don't know why the Virginia State Police and the FBI are suddenly referring to the murder of Robin Edwards and David Knobling as the Isle of Wight homicides. Nobody calls them that. This distancing language, in my opinion, seems to be actually separating them from the Colonial Parkway murders. Also note the fact that they use the expression no forensic or physical evidence. If anything, the identification of this suspect confirms that Robin Edwards and David Knobling's murder is directly related to the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley, because we know that Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. was a leading suspect in the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley. So I don't understand why the law enforcement spokespeople, and there were a number of them, and they did a great job, but why they're parsing things in this very odd way. I do understand, as someone who's been following this case for 37 years, that we currently have no forensic or physical evidence that links the 4 double homicides in the Colonial Parkway murders together. In other words, it's all circumstantial. But if anything, this identification of this suspect confirms that Robin Edwards and David Knobling are part of the Colonial Parkway murders. And I actually don't appreciate law enforcement suddenly calling this the Isle of Wight homicides. They are not the Isle of Wight homicides. Robin Edwards and David Knobling were killed in a series of murders that are referred to commonly as the Colonial Parkway murders, and this announcement confirms that.
So I want to follow that up by continuing with another statement that they made from, again, this is Corinne Geller. She stated, quote, "We recognize this announcement has been a long time coming, especially for the families of these victims. What we do hope is to provide some closure to them, and we recognize that there are still other families related to the Colonial Parkway murders double homicide victims who are still hoping for answers. That is why we continue to push forward with our investigations. We're not ruling anything out. We are examining other cases and pursuing new ones. Our agencies are still working to reconstruct the movements and encounters of Alan Wilmer Sr., which is why we are asking for the public's help." Bill, what did you make of, we are not ruling anything out, we are examining other cases, we are pursuing new ones? That's 3 interesting pieces of assertion right there.
I really appreciate what Corinne Geller and the other spokespeople are saying. I think this is quite important. First of all, I am highly confident, based on what I know about Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., I think he will be linked to other unsolved homicides in Virginia. I think his participation in at least some of the other Colonial Parkway murders should be confirmed, and fairly soon. He was a suspect in the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley, and that's an unavoidable fact. I know that the media is starting to cover this idea that it's very curious that the FBI and the Virginia State Police are not highlighting that in their announcement, and I find it a bit off-putting.
Yeah, the way we were talking earlier, I don't think it's curious. I think that they're trying to hide the fact that they screwed up very badly. The information about Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. and his early involvement as a suspect in the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley comes from the book of record on this case, A Special Kind of Evil, by our friend Blaine Pardo.
We're looking forward to having Blaine Pardo on Mind Over Murder with us in the very near future. I spoke to Blaine this morning, and he is more than willing to come on and give us more background on his reporting in A Special Kind of Evil, the Colonial Parkway Serial Killings, the book that Blaine Pardo wrote with his daughter, Victoria Hester. If you don't own this book, I urge you to buy a copy of it. It's available online in both hard copy and in electronic form, ebook as well. We're going to be asking Blaine to come on the show and talk to us. The short version is that he confirms that this man, Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., he doesn't mention him by name at this time, but he mentions the license plate, which he changes slightly because he didn't want people to be taking it upon themselves to be looking up this guy's license plate information and perhaps harassing an innocent man. He was a suspect from the very beginning of the investigation into the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley. Very odd that this was not highlighted at the press conference. You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
Now, when Special Agent in Charge Brian Dugan of the FBI stood up to speak at the press conference, he did go into great detail as to what precisely he is asking the public to look for when they send in tip information. I want to quote for a moment here from SAC Dugan. On behalf of the FBI, I want to express my sincere condolences to the victims' families. That is why we're asking the public to take a good look at the suspect's photos. If you had any encounters with him or his vehicle or his watercraft, hunted with him, farmed oysters or clams, docked next to him, spent time with him on a personal basis, we want to hear from you. We are also interested in hearing from the public about areas where Wilmer was working as a fisherman and as a tree cutter, locations where he may have been known to hunt, or bars, clubs, and lounges he frequented. A piece of information, no matter how small, could be useful to investigators. He gives all the information about the tip lines, which we'll put up on our show notes. And then he had this very interesting thing to say here. We recognize relationships and loyalties change over time, as do people and their perspectives. There are occasions when people who may have had information of a crime do not feel comfortable coming forward with that information. This may have been due to relationships with the persons involved or out of concern for their own safety, reputation, or standing amongst friends. Even though Mr. Wilmer is deceased, we want you to know it is not too late to come forward. And again, he repeats the FBI tip information.
And that FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI, or submit a tip online at tips.fbi.gov. You also have the option, if you choose to somebody from the Virginia State Police, you can email them at questions@vsp.virginia.gov. And we really want to encourage people, if you know anything about this man, now is the time. I thought SAC Dugan's remarks were very well thought out, and I totally agree with him. We've heard this in other cases. Over time, relationships change. People get married, they get divorced. People are born, people die, people get older and calm down. I'm still working on the calming down part. People have said to me even today online that some of them were reluctant to come forward. And all I can say is, look, I get the fact that this man is never going to be brought into court. He's never going to be found guilty, punished, incarcerated. But there are still people, my own family included, who are still waiting for answers. We're thrilled that Robin Edwards, David Knobling, and Teresa Howell's family have some answers. It's never going to bring their loved ones back. The rest of the Colonial Parkway Murders families and other families, I believe, throughout Virginia are still looking for answers in their unsolved murders and disappearances. And I think this man is involved in those cases. There is no question at this point, he's been confirmed with 3 kills. We're dealing with a Virginia-based serial killer. Now would be the time to step forward and say, yeah, I used to dock my boat in Gloucester, and that guy had this very distinctive fishing boat, the Denny Wade. It has a very splashy painting on the side with the names of the 2 kids, Denny Wade, that would have been memorable. Not to mention, as we talked about, his trucks, his physical stature, his look. I think SAC Dugan makes a really good point that even though he's gone, there can be so much value created with people coming forward now and speaking to law enforcement. People can speak to law enforcement without incriminating themselves. They can say, I want to tell you this story, but I don't want to be charged for something. Or look, the fact that you were involved in something that might have been questionable, whether it's underage drinking or drug use or whatever. Law enforcement is trying to solve these cases, not charge people for ancient offenses that happened decades ago. If you knew this man back in the 1980s, now's the time to step forward.
Exactly. And SAC Dugan made a good point about no piece of information being too small. So, okay, maybe you only docked your boat next to his. Maybe you only ever ran into him when you were cutting trees after Hurricane Hugo. That is still information that the FBI needs to know. You do not have to have knowledge of Alan Wilmer Sr. committing a crime to call in or write to the tip line. Right now, they need the best, fullest picture possible of what this guy was doing, where he was going, who he was hanging with. As Bill pointed out, he is a serial killer. The current definition of a serial killer is 2 or more kills. He fits that criteria. There was a serial killer roaming this area of Virginia from 1986 until the day he died in 2017. We have to know what he was doing during that time period. And the more people that come forward with information, the better able the Bureau is going to be to put together a picture of other potential victims that may have been impacted by this guy. And I think you're right, Bill. I think that there are going to be other cases in the Colonial Parkway murders that are ultimately going to be linked to this guy. And I'm wondering if the other Parkway adjacent cases that we have seen in recent years, like Lorianne Powell and Brian Pettinger, I'm wondering if they aren't going to be linked to him too in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it's quite possible. One of the things that's really important to emphasize, Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. had no arrest record. He'd never been convicted of a crime, even though this guy was involved in multiple murders. And I think there'll be murders outside the Colonial Parkway murders, as you said, that can be linked to him. Something as simple as I remember him being at my hunt club, or he came and cut down trees on my father's property, or whatever it is. Remember, the investigators know what they're looking for. They're looking to place him at certain times and locations, and that may ultimately steer them towards creating a backstory on where this man was. I recognize that this is incredibly challenging for the investigators to be trying to rebuild this history 37 years later. Every single bit of information, if you know anything about this guy. I've already heard some very interesting stories, which will be urging those people to pass on to law enforcement. Failing that, I will, if I have to, just get the information to law enforcement so that they have this information.
We also want to encourage anyone who has ever reached out to us with a story about an incident that occurred to you on the Colonial Parkway. If you have a feeling that the person that you saw on the Colonial Parkway, the person whose truck you encountered, was Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., please reach out to the investigators and let them know so that they can place him on the parkway. It is very important that we determine whether or not he was out trolling the Colonial Parkway during this time period. If so, that might be an even better and closer connection to putting him in the location and vicinity of the murders on the parkway, that of Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski, Keith Call, and Cassandra Haley. So if you have given us that information about run-ins on the parkway in years past, we thank you very much for that. But we encourage you to please take that information as well and get it to law enforcement in whatever form you feel comfortable. It is vital that they have this information.
We don't mean to ignore the Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer murder that occurred in August 1989, resulting in their bodies being found at the Hunt Club off Interstate 64 in New Kent County. This is something that law enforcement is also very interested in because obviously he fits the profile. And now we have a confirmed serial killer in Virginia. I know it's shocking and we're still absorbing this information ourselves. We don't know of any additional links that he has to my sister Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski's murder or the murder at New Kent County Rest Stop and Hunt Club, Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer. There's clearly a link to the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley, and I know they're going to be working those angles hard in the coming weeks and months. And we'll be definitely reporting back on what we're learning, what we're hearing. We're looking forward to having Blaine Pardo on the podcast. It's long overdue to talk about his work in the Colonial Parkway murders and, get into some backstory with him as well on this new, he's more than a suspect. He is a confirmed serial killer.
24 hours on, it's been a wild ride. Again, we want to thank everybody who has reached out, who's cheered, who's shared all of our updates. Thank you for your unwavering support. We're trying very hard to answer questions and comments as they show up on our various pages, Mind Over Murder and Colonial Parkway Murders. It's been a deluge, and it may take us a little bit to get through all of those comments and questions. Please be patient with us and know that we are seeing everything. We are trying to respond to it where possible, but a little bit, it's like trying to empty the ocean with a thimble at the moment. There's a lot there.
Yeah. And I said something to Kristin yesterday, which is all I can say regarding the Edwards, Knobling, and Howell families is that we're thinking of them.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a greeting card available out there that says congratulations on finding out who killed your loved one. It's just one of those situations where you just don't know what to say.
Yeah. The main picture on the Daily Press this morning was a picture of Jeanette Edwards Santiago, Robin's sister, at the press conference yesterday. Mm-hmm. And it broke my heart to see it. I know that she is thrilled to have this information. And it's got to be a relief that it doesn't bring Robin or David or Teresa back. And I know that's got to be difficult for them. So while we're thrilled on their behalf, we know that they're probably dealing with a crazy amount of emotion right now. And their family statement at the press conference did ask for people, please, to extend them their privacy. And the same went for the Howell families, and the same went for the Wilmer family, who I'm sure is dealing with an absolutely awful shock of learning who their father actually was. I think at the end of the day, what I'm carrying with me and will continue to carry with me is the fact that we have 2 cases that are solved. They have answers, and I was a little afraid I wasn't going to see the day.
Yeah, for real.
So thank you to everybody who has continued to hang in there with us, who is following our Facebook pages and all of our social media. Please keep it up. And please, it is so vitally important. Share all of the information that we put up about this suspect. And if you have information, please do not hesitate to go to any law enforcement tip line that is available to you. We will put all that information up on our show notes.
We can't thank everybody enough.
It's been a roller coaster, but I like roller coasters. So, hey, I'm willing to go for the ride on this one.
Fair enough.
That is going to do it for this episode of Mind Over Murder. Thank you so much for listening, and please stay tuned for more updates on the Colonial Parkway murders and the Parkway adjacent cases. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.